In 1038, fewer than 500 Norse warriors made an entire Islamic emirate abandon their fortresses without a fight. These weren't just any warriors, they were the legendary Varangian Guard, and their arrival in Sicily would spark the most terrifying military campaign the Mediterranean had witnessed in centuries. Think about that for a moment. 500 axe-wielding Norsemen sent 50,000 Muslim defenders fleeing from fortresses they'd held for 200 years. The fate of Sicily, crossroads of three civilizations, hung in the balance, and by the end of this video, you'll understand how Viking mercenaries nearly changed Mediterranean history forever. You'll discover why Harald Hardrada's berserker charge at Syracuse became legendary across 3 continents. You'll witness the shocking betrayal that snatched victory from Byzantine hands, and you'll learn how this forgotten campaign set the stage for the Norman conquest that would reshape Europe. But here's where it gets insane. The Byzantine Greeks actually convinced Viking warriors to sail 2,000 miles south to fight Muslims in Sicily. What made General Maniakes so terrifying that Arab chronicles still called him the Destroyer centuries later? And why did the Byzantines abandon their conquest when total victory was within reach? How could disciplined Muslim forces that had held Sicily for 2 centuries collapse so quickly? How did political jealousy in Constantinople doom 10,000 soldiers to a fate worse than death? The future king of Norway was there, earning his fortune in blood, but his real story is darker than the sagas tell. What happened next defied all military logic. Muslim commanders who had fought off attacks for generations suddenly ordered full retreats at the mere rumor of approaching Varangians. Fortified cities that could withstand year-long sieges opened their gates without firing an arrow. To understand how 500 Norsemen terrified an entire emirate, let me transport you to the powder keg that was 11th century Sicily. If you're fascinated by the forgotten battles that shaped our world, where Vikings, Greeks, and Arabs clashed for Mediterranean supremacy, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic war history. Ring the notification bell, because what I'm about to reveal will change how you see medieval warfare forever. Sicily in 1036 was an island divided against itself. For 2 centuries, the Calbid dynasty had ruled this jewel of the Mediterranean from their palace in Palermo, but now their emirate was crumbling. Zirid raiders from Africa had landed on the southern shores, burning mosques and enslaving fellow Muslims. The island that once sent mighty fleets against Italian coasts now couldn't defend its own harbours. You have to understand what Sicily meant to the medieval world. This wasn't just another island. Whoever controls Sicily controls the Mediterranean. Its ports commanded every trade route between Europe, Africa, and the East. Its fields fed entire kingdoms. Its strategic position made it the key to naval supremacy. For the Byzantine Empire, losing Sicily 2 centuries earlier had been a wound that never healed. Enter our players in this deadly game. First, George Maniakes. They called him the Giant, standing 6 feet 6 inches tall. In an age when most men barely reached 5.5 feet, this Byzantine general had never lost a battle. Arab mothers whispered his name to frighten children. His tactical genius was matched only by his brutality. When Maniakes took a city, survivors were rare. Then came Harald Hardrada, the Ruthless, a 23-year-old Norwegian prince in exile, serving in the Varangian Guard to earn his fortune. The sagas paint him as a hero, but the truth was darker. Harald had fled Norway after his brother's failed rebellion, and he needed gold mountains of it to reclaim his throne. Sicily would give him that gold, one bloody battle at a time. The desperate Calbid ruler, Emir Ahmad al-Akal, made the fatal mistake that would doom Muslim Sicily. Pressed by Zirid invaders and abandoned by the Fatimid Caliphate in Cairo, he sent ambassadors to Constantinople begging for military aid. He offered the Byzantine emperor shared rule of Sicily if imperial forces would drive out the African raiders. But here's where it gets insane. Both the Fatimid Caliphate and the Byzantine Empire were at their absolute peaks of power. This wasn't a clash between declining civilizations. These were superpowers with resources that dwarfed anything Western Europe could muster. The Byzantines had Greek fire, the medieval world's most terrifying weapon. They had the Varangian Guard, the most feared warriors on earth. They had generals like Maniakes, who turned warfare into deadly art. Emperor Michael IV saw opportunity. Why share Sicily when he could take it all? He ordered Maniakes to assemble an invasion force that would not just repel the Zirids, it would reconquer the entire island. The emirate that had invited Byzantine help had just signed its own death warrant. The strategic importance of this campaign cannot be overstated. If Byzantium retook Sicily, they would control the central Mediterranean again. Muslim expansion into southern Europe would halt. The balance of power between Christianity and Islam would shift dramatically. This single island could change the course of history. But Maniakes had something special planned. He wouldn't just bring Byzantine regulars, he would unleash the Varangian Guard Norse warriors, whose reputation for savagery exceeded even his own. The Muslims of Sicily had faced many enemies, but they had never faced anything like what was coming. The powder keg was ready. All it needed was a spark. But how do you assemble an army capable of conquering an island that had resisted for 200 years? Maniakes assembled his forces with the precision of a master craftsman building a weapon. His Byzantine regulars numbered 10,000 men-heavy cavalry cataphracts, armored like moving fortresses, mounted archers who could put an arrow through a coin at full gallop, and infantry trained in formations unchanged since ancient Rome. These weren't conscripted farmers. They were professional soldiers who'd spent their lives perfecting the art of death. But the Varangians brought something the Muslims had never faced. 500 Norse warriors, each carrying a Danish axe that weighed 10 pounds with a blade that could split a man from crown to groin. These weren't ordinary Vikings. They were the cream of Scandinavian nobility, younger sons and exiled princes seeking fortune in the emperor's service. Their oath to Byzantium was sealed in blood, and their reputation preceded them like a plague. Harald Hardrada commanded his own unit within the guard, hand-picked killers who'd followed him from the frozen fjords of Norway to the scorching sands of Syria. They painted their shields black and wore their hair in elaborate braids weighted with Byzantine gold. When they marched, their axes rang against their mail in a rhythm that sounded like approaching thunder. Then Maniakes did something nobody expected. He recruited 5,000 Lombard heavy cavalry from southern Italy, led by the Norman adventurer William de Hauteville. These men were descendants of Vikings themselves, but they'd adapted to Mediterranean warfare. They brought something new, the devastating cavalry charge that would later conquer England. Normans and Varangians fighting side by side, the Muslim defenders had no idea what approached. The invasion fleet numbered 300 ships, Byzantine dromons war galleys, armed with bronze rams and Greek fire projectors, formed the war fleet. Merchant vessels commandeered from across the empire carried horses, supplies, and siege equipment. The logistics alone were staggering. Each Varangian required 50 pounds of equipment. Each cataphract needed 3 horses. The army would consume 2 tons of grain daily. The Muslim defenders should have been formidable. 30,000 Kalbid troops garrisoned fortresses across Sicily. These were veterans who'd repelled Byzantine raids for generations. They knew the terrain, controlled the fortified cities, and could call upon 20,000 emergency levies from the civilian population. The Zirid raiders added another variable 15,000 African warriors who answered to no one, ravaging the countryside. But Maniakes had already won his first victory through psychological warfare. Weeks before the invasion, Byzantine agents spread tales throughout Sicily. They spoke of Varangian atrocities in Syria, how they'd stacked Saracen heads in pyramids, how they fought on after taking mortal wounds, how they consumed the flesh of their enemies. Most were lies, but some were true, and the Muslim population couldn't tell the difference. The chronicles describe what happened next as inevitable. As the Byzantine fleet gathered in Calabria, Muslim fishing boats fled at the first sight of Byzantine sails. Refugees streamed toward Palermo with wild tales. The Norsemen were coming, giants with golden hair and demon's eyes who felt no pain and knew no mercy. Then came the crossing. September 1038. The Strait of Messina churned with unexpected storms. Ships scattered, horses screamed in the holds, and seasick Lombards prayed to saints they'd rarely acknowledged before. The Varangians, bred to the sea, laughed at the Mediterranean's fury. They'd sailed worse waters in open longships. This strait was nothing compared to the North Atlantic, but fate had other plans. The storm that should have destroyed the invasion fleet instead became Maniakes' first tactical advantage. Muslim scouts, watching for the Byzantine approach, assumed the fleet had been scattered or sunk. They relaxed their vigilance. When 300 ships appeared on the horizon in perfect formation, the psychological impact was devastating. What happened in the next 72 hours would echo through centuries. The first Varangian to set foot on Sicilian soil was Harald Hardrada himself. Legend says he kissed his axe and swore an oath before the next full moon. He would be rich enough to buy a crown, or dead enough to feast in Valhalla. As Byzantine sails appeared on the horizon, the stage was set for one of history's most one-sided campaigns. Day 1 dawned blood red over Messina. The Muslim garrison commander, watching from the city walls, saw something that made his blood freeze: 300 Byzantine ships approaching in perfect crescent formation. But it wasn't the ships that terrified him. It was the sound carrying across the water. 500 Varangian voices raised in their ancient war song, axes beating against shields in rhythm, creating a thunderous heartbeat that grew louder with each passing moment. The landing was unopposed. Maniakes had expected fierce resistance on the beaches, but the Messina garrison had simply fled. Muslim scouts sent urgent reports that reached the regional commanders within hours. Demons with golden hair had arrived. The descriptions were specific and terrifying. Warriors who stood a full head taller than the tallest Saracen, axes that gleamed like mirrors, eyes the color of winter ice that showed no human emotion. This is where the chronicles become almost unbelievable. The first skirmish occurred 3 miles inland when 300 Varangians on foot encountered 2,000 Muslim cavalry elite horsemen who'd never lost an engagement. The Muslims charged, confident in their numerical superiority and mounted advantage. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration of why the Varangian Guard had become legend. The Norsemen formed their shield wall, a tactic their ancestors had perfected over centuries. But this wasn't the loose formation of Viking raiders. Byzantine training had refined it into something terrifying, an interlocking barrier of wood and iron that moved like a single organism. When the Muslim cavalry hit that wall, horses screamed and reared. The psychological impact was immediate. Arabian horses, trained from birth for war, refused to charge the Varangian line. Then came Harold's first legendary moment. As the Muslim cavalry milled in confusion, their commander, an Emirate champion named Khalil ibn Yusuf, who'd killed 17 men in single combat, rode forward to challenge the Norse leader. Harold stepped out from the shield wall alone. The duel lasted less than 10 seconds. One swing of Harold's axe removed Khalil's head so cleanly that his body remained upright in the saddle for several heartbeats before toppling. What happened next would haunt Muslim commanders for generations. The entire cavalry force, 2,000 veteran horsemen, turned and fled without orders. They'd seen champions die before, but there was something about the casual efficiency of Harold's killing stroke. The way he'd shown no emotion, no celebration, just returned to the line as if he'd swatted a fly. The survivors spread word. These weren't men. They were something else. Days 7 through 10 saw Maniakes' army advancing along the coast at a pace that defied military logic, 20 miles per day through hostile territory. But it wasn't hostile anymore. Muslim fortresses that had been built to withstand year-long sieges surrendered without loosing a single arrow. The garrison of Rometta, a cliff-top fortress considered impregnable, abandoned their position after seeing the Varangian vanguard approach. The tactical innovation Maniakes employed was brilliant in its simplicity. Byzantine mounted archers would approach a fortress first, their mobility allowing them to avoid counterfire while maintaining psychological pressure. Then came the Lombard heavy cavalry, a sight that stirred genetic memories in the Muslim defenders. Their grandfathers had faced similar Norman riders. But the masterstroke was the Varangians, marching in perfect formation, singing their death songs, axes glinting in the Sicilian sun. Here's the detail historians still can't explain. At the fortress of Rometta, the Muslim garrison had prepared boiling oil, stones, and arrows. They outnumbered the approaching Byzantines 3-1. Yet when the Varangian guard reached the gates and began their rhythmic axe-beating against their shields, the defenders simply opened the gates and fled through the back passages. They left behind full treasuries, intact weapons, even hot meals still on the tables. But Maniakes had barely begun his terror campaign. He ordered a specific protocol for each conquered fortress. One defender would be left alive, usually the youngest soldier found. This survivor would be given a message to carry. Tell them Maniakes comes. Tell them the Varangians hunger. Tell them resistance is death, but flight is permitted. The psychological warfare was precise and devastating. Byzantine discipline combined with Varangian ferocity created a military force unlike anything the Mediterranean had seen. Where Byzantine cataphracts provided tactical flexibility, Varangians provided shock impact. Where Greek fire provided technological superiority, Norse axes provided primal terror. Maniakes had forged a perfect weapon. The Muslim response revealed their growing panic. Emir Ahmad al-Akal ordered all forces to concentrate at Syracuse, abandoning the defensive network that had protected Sicily for 2 centuries. In 10 days, the Byzantines had conquered more territory than previous invasions had taken in years. Refugees flooded the roads, carrying tales that grew wilder with each telling. The Norsemen were immune to wounds. They ate the hearts of enemies. Their leader Maniax was a giant who could crush a man's skull with one hand. This is where legend separates from history, but the reality was terrifying enough. The Byzantine advance was methodical, professional, and utterly ruthless. Each day brought news of another fortress fallen, another garrison fled. The campaign that should have taken years was being measured in weeks. Then came Syracuse, and the battle that would become legend. Syracuse rose from the coast like a promise of blood. 15,000 defenders manned ancient Greek walls that had repelled Carthaginians, Romans, and Vandals across 2 millennia. These 40-foot fortifications, reinforced by Muslim engineers, turned the city into a death trap for any attacker. Emir Ahmad al-Akal had pulled every available soldier behind these walls, believing that here, finally, the Byzantine advance would shatter. Maniax studied the defenses for 3 days, his tactical mind calculating angles, distances, weaknesses. The conventional approach would cost thousands of lives he couldn't spare for the campaign ahead. He planned a 3-pronged assault. Byzantine marines would attack the harbour, drawing defenders to the seawalls. Lombard cavalry would feint toward the land gates, pulling reserves from the walls. Meanwhile, his cataphracts would prepare the real assault on the eastern fortifications. But then the Varangians requested something that shocked even Maniax. Harold Hardrada and his captains approached the general's tent at dusk. They wanted to attack at night, not with the army, but alone. 500 men against 15,000 behind impregnable walls. Any other general would have laughed. Maniax listened. "Give us 1 night," Harold said, his Greek accented but clear. "If we fail, you lose only Varangians. If we succeed, you take Syracuse without losing a single Byzantine life." The audacity was breathtaking. But Maniax had learned to trust Varangian instincts. These men had an almost supernatural ability to sense weakness, to find the one crack in any defense. What followed would echo through centuries of military history. As darkness fell on the 4th night of the siege, 500 Varangians moved towards Syracuse's walls in complete silence. They'd blackened their mail with soot, muffled their weapons with cloth, and divided into 50 groups of 10, each group led by a veteran who'd scaled walls from Norway to Anatolia. The moon was new, providing perfect darkness. Muslim sentries strained to see movement on the plains, expecting the Byzantine assault at dawn. They never looked down. The first Varangian reached the top of the wall without alerting a single guard. Then another, then 10 more. In 30 minutes, 100 Norse warriors crouched on Syracuse's battlements like ravens waiting to feast. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. The signal wasn't a horn or shout. It was the sound of the first guard's death, a wet gurgle as Harold's axe opened his throat. Then hell erupted on Syracuse's walls. Varangian war cries, "Till Valhalla," and "Blood for the All-Father," shattered the night. The psychological impact was instant and total. Muslim defenders, startled from sleep, found demons from their nightmares standing among them, axes already red with blood. The gates opened not through battle but through panic. As Varangians cleared the walls with methodical efficiency, terrified defenders fled toward the city centre. The gate guards, hearing Norse war cries above and seeing their comrades fleeing, abandoned their posts. 20 minutes, that's all it took. 500 men had broken a defense that should have held for months. The statistics here are almost unbelievable. 15,000 defenders routed by 500 attackers who suffered only 30 wounded, no dead. Dawn revealed a city in chaos. Muslim panic had become self-fulfilling prophecy. "The Norsemen cannot be killed," survivors screamed as they fled through streets clogged with refugees. The speed of collapse defied military logic. Defensive positions prepared for weeks were abandoned in minutes. The city's commander, attempting to organize resistance at the emir's palace, found only empty corridors. His own guards had fled. Maniax led his army through gates thrown wide open, Byzantine banners replacing Muslim crescents without resistance. The palace fell before noon, treasury vaults that contained 2 million gold dinars, the accumulated wealth of 2 centuries, captured intact. The emir himself was found hiding in a cistern, pulled out by Varangians who laughed at his offers of ransom. 10,000 Muslims fled Syracuse in the first hour after the gates opened, streaming into the countryside with whatever they could carry. But the Varangians weren't finished. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a hunt. Norse warriors, blood-drunk from their night's work, pursued fleeing defenders through olive groves and vineyards. The killing continued until Maniax personally ordered it stopped, needing prisoners more than corpses. The impossible had happened. Syracuse, jewel of Muslim Sicily, had fallen in a single night to 500 men. The psychological impact rippled across the island like an earthquake. If Syracuse could fall so easily, what fortress could stand? What army could resist? The mythology of Varangian invincibility, carefully cultivated by maniacs, had become reality in Muslim minds. The next 6 weeks saw systematic destruction of Muslim power in eastern Sicily. Town after town fell in a pattern that became grimly predictable. Byzantine forces approach, Muslim defenders flee, Varangians occupy without resistance. Troina, Maniace, Centuripe names that had resisted Christian conquest for 2 centuries surrendered at the mere sight of Norse banners. Maniax refined his terror tactics with scientific precision. At each conquered town, Varangians would execute the garrison commander always by beheading with a single axe stroke, always in the town square, always leaving one soldier alive to carry the news. The message never varied. Maniax comes. Resistance is death. Flight is permitted. This calculated mercy was more terrifying than wholesale slaughter. It gave defenders permission to abandon their posts while making resistance unthinkable. The statistics tell the story. In 42 days, Byzantine forces conquered 47 fortified positions. Muslim casualties numbered in thousands. Byzantine losses remained under 100. The Varangian Guard, the spear point of every assault, had lost only 6 men, all to accidents rather than enemy action. Their reputation had become their greatest weapon. Muslim forces refused to take the field, choosing flight over facing the Golden Demons. But then came the battle that would define the campaign. At Troina, something unexpected happened. 25,000 Muslims Kalbid regulars, reinforced by Zirid raiders and civilian volunteers, decided to make a stand. The emir's cousin, Muhammad ibn Ahmad, had convinced them that Varangian invincibility was mythology, that disciplined Muslims fighting for their faith could defeat any enemy. The stage was set for the ancient world's greatest slaughter. Troina sat on a hilltop, its approach funneled through a narrow valley that negated Byzantine numerical advantages. Muhammad ibn Ahmad had chosen his ground well. For the first time since landing, Maniax faced a genuine military challenge. His scouts reported Muslim morale was high, their position strong, their numbers superior. What happened next would haunt both empires. Maniax didn't hesitate. He had the perfect tool for this exact situation. The Varangians would be the anvil, the Byzantine cavalry, the hammer. But first, he would let Muslim confidence build. Sometimes the greatest victories came from letting your enemy think they were winning. Dawn at Troina began with Byzantine defeat, or so it appeared. Maniax sent his Lombard cavalry charging up the valley in apparent fury, only to have them retreat under withering arrow fire. Muslim defenders cheered, their confidence soaring. The infidels could be beaten. A second assault, this time by Byzantine infantry, also failed. By noon, Muhammad ibn Ahmad was certain of victory. Then Maniax made the decision that won him immortality. As Muslim forces pursued the retreating Byzantines down into the valley, drunk on their apparent success, 500 Varangians emerged from concealed positions on both flanks. They'd spent the night climbing the rocky slopes, positioning themselves for this moment. The trap was perfect. What the Muslims saw next broke their will to fight. Varangians descending from the heights like an avalanche of iron and death, their war cries echoing off the valley walls, creating an acoustic effect that made 500 sound like 5,000. The Muslim pursuit turned into a stampede back toward Troina, but Byzantine cataphracts had already circled behind to seal the valley. The slaughter was mathematical in its efficiency. 25,000 Muslims compressed into a killing ground perhaps half a mile long, Varangians forming an unbreakable wall at one end, Byzantine cavalry charging again and again from the other, Greek fire turning escape routes into corridors of flame. The battle became an execution lasting 4 hours. When silence finally fell, 15,000 Muslims lay dead in the valley. The survivors, those who'd stayed in Troina rather than join the pursuit, surrendered immediately. Byzantine casualties, 100 dead, mostly from the morning's feigned retreats. Varangian losses, 8 wounded, none killed. The tactical masterpiece was complete. The chronicles say the ground couldn't absorb all the blood. Streams ran red for days. Carrion birds darkened the sky for weeks. But more than bodies died at Troina, Muslim will to resist in Sicily died there too. Word spread faster than Maniax could march. Resistance meant annihilation. The Varangians weren't just warriors. They were death itself, golden-haired and axe-wielding, inevitable as winter. 3 months after landing, Maniax controlled 3/4 of Sicily. The campaign that should have taken years was essentially complete. Only the western strongholds around Palermo remained in Muslim hands, and their fall seemed inevitable. The emir sent increasingly desperate messages to Cairo begging for reinforcement, but the Fatimid Caliphate had its own problems. Sicily was on its own. The transformation was total. Churches destroyed 2 centuries earlier were rebuilt. Byzantine tax collectors replaced Muslim administrators. Greek replaced Arabic in the markets. Most remarkably, the transition was largely peaceful. Maniakes had learned that living subjects paid more taxes than dead ones. His governance, while harsh, was predictably harsh. After the chaos of recent years, even Byzantine tyranny seemed preferable. Harold and his Varangians had earned wealth beyond imagining. Each warrior's share of Syracuse's treasury alone equaled a lifetime's earnings. Add the plunder from 47 fortresses, and these Norse adventurers had become rich men. Harold himself commanded wealth sufficient to buy not just a crown, but an entire kingdom, which was exactly his plan. At this moment, Sicily's fate seemed sealed. Muslim power was broken, Byzantine authority established, the future clear, victory was complete. Or so it seemed, because 2,000 miles away in Constantinople, jealousy was about to destroy everything. The messenger ship arrived on a perfect Mediterranean morning, purple banners announcing it carried imperial orders. Maniakes, planning the final assault on Palermo that would complete his conquest, expected congratulations and reinforcements. Instead, he received chains. The charges were so absurd they seemed like dark comedy embezzlement of imperial funds, conspiracy with enemies, gross insubordination. The real crime was success that made lesser men seem smaller. Admiral Stephen, the emperor's brother-in-law and commander of the Byzantine fleet, had spent 3 months composing his masterpiece of destruction. Every victory Maniakes achieved had been twisted into evidence of treason. The speed of conquest? Clearly prior arrangement with the Muslims. The low casualties? Proof he avoided real fighting. The captured treasuries? Obviously he'd hidden the true wealth. 2,000 miles from Sicily, in the perfumed halls of Constantinople, these lies found eager ears. The arrest itself was theatrical cruelty. Byzantine marines surrounded Maniakes' tent at dawn, chains ready for the empire's greatest general. The army watched in disbelief as their undefeated commander was chained like a common criminal. Veterans who'd followed Maniakes through 100 battles wept openly. The Varangians gripped their axes, awaiting Harold's word to cut down the arresting officers. One word would have sparked mutiny. Harold gave none yet. Without Maniakes, Byzantine advance didn't just stall, it reversed with stunning speed. The admiral who'd orchestrated his downfall took command, a man whose naval victories existed only in his own reports. His first decision revealed his incompetence, dividing the army to garrison conquered territories while simultaneously advancing on Palermo. In one stroke, he destroyed the concentrated power that had made Byzantine forces unstoppable. The Lombard allies were the first to recognize the catastrophe. William de Hauteville, no fool, saw Byzantine weakness and made his own calculations. Within a week of Maniakes' arrest, 5,000 Lombard cavalry simply rode away, taking their knowledge of Byzantine tactics with them. They would return to Sicily but as conquerors, not allies. The seeds of Norman Sicily were planted in Byzantine stupidity. Here's the twist that changes everything. Muslims who'd been paralyzed by terror suddenly realized the monster was caged. Garrison commanders who'd fled at rumors of Maniakes' approach now prepared resistance. The mythology of Byzantine invincibility, carefully built over 3 months, shattered in 3 days. Refugees began returning to abandoned cities. Weapons hidden during the conquest were retrieved. The emir in Palermo, who'd been negotiating surrender terms, instead began organizing counterattacks. Death statistics tell the story's reversal. In 3 months under Maniakes, 30,000 Muslims killed, 500 Byzantines lost. In 3 weeks under Stephen, 1,000 Byzantines dead. Muslim losses minimal. The tactical genius was gone, replaced by aristocratic incompetence. Sicily began slipping through Byzantine fingers like sand. The Varangian response was immediate and absolute. These warriors had sworn oath to the emperor, not to his incompetent relatives. Without Maniakes, they saw no reason to die for Byzantine stupidity. Harold assembled his 500 in Syracuse's main square, their axes raised in salute to their imprisoned general. His words, recorded by his scald Theodulf, dripped with prophetic accuracy. "We have given them back their island. Byzantine gold has bought Byzantine defeat." The fury wasn't just professional, it was personal. Varangians had bled for this conquest, even if minimally. They'd scaled walls, charged into valleys of death, earned their wealth honorably. To see it thrown away by palace intrigue violated everything in their warrior code. Some demanded they free Maniaques by force. Others wanted to sack Syracuse themselves before departing. Harold chose discipline barely. The next sound would haunt survivors forever. 500 Varangian axes striking shields in unison, not their war rhythm but a funeral dirge. They were mourning not their dead but Byzantine competence. Then they marched to the ships, taking their reputation with them. No Byzantine officer dared stop them. Without the Varangians, the army wasn't just weakened, it was psychologically castrated. The golden demons were leaving, and every Muslim spy reported it within hours. The Muslim recovery displayed the resilience that had kept them in Sicily for 2 centuries. Within a month, coordinated attacks struck isolated Byzantine garrisons across the island, positions that Maniaques had taken in days held out for weeks before falling. But they all fell. Without unified command, without Varangian shock troops, without the terror of Maniaques' reputation, Byzantine forces retreated like tide, fleeing the shore. The fortress of Troina, site of Maniaques' greatest victory, fell to a Muslim night assault. The defenders had no Varangians to counter with. Centuripe's garrison negotiated surrender terms rather than fight. Maniace, the fortress named for the general himself, held out longest before its starving defenders agreed to convert to Islam rather than die. The systematic reconquest became systematic collapse. Only Messina held, its position allowing resupply by sea and its walls manned by the last competent Byzantine commander, the Armenian general Katakalon. For 4 years, it would remain Byzantine, a lonely outpost of failed ambition. Every ship that docked brought the same news: another position lost, another garrison destroyed, another Byzantine humiliation. The most successful reconquest in Byzantine history ended not with Muslim swords, but with Byzantine politics. The irony of what happened next is staggering. The emir, who'd invited Byzantine intervention, found himself stronger than before. His rivals were dead, killed by Maniaques. His treasury was empty, but his authority was absolute. Muslim Sicily had survived its greatest threat through no virtue of its own. Byzantine jealousy had accomplished what Muslim arms couldn't. Maniaques himself would die 3 years later, not in glorious battle but stabbed during a botched arrest attempt, his tactical genius forever lost to imperial paranoia. The Byzantine Empire had destroyed its own greatest general at the moment of his greatest triumph. But the battle's end was just the beginning of Sicily's transformation. History has a sense of irony. In 1061, 23 years after Maniaques' arrest, Robert Guiscard landed his Norman army at the exact spot where Byzantine forces had come ashore. But these weren't Byzantine allies anymore. They were conquerors who'd learned every lesson from the failed 1038 campaign. William de Hauteville, who'd ridden away when Maniaques fell, returned as architect of conquest. The Norman tactics were eerily familiar: concentrated forces, psychological warfare, systematic fortress reduction. They even employed Norse warriors, different Norsemen, same axes, identical terror. Where Byzantine politics had failed, Norman ambition succeeded. Sicily fell permanently to descendants of Vikings, just not the ones Maniaques had led. The island that Byzantine incompetence had abandoned became the jewel of Norman power, launching pad for kingdoms that would reshape Europe's destiny. Harold Hardrada took his Sicilian gold and carved his name across the world. The wealth from Syracuse's treasury funded his return to Norway, where he claimed the throne in 1047. For 20 years, he ruled with the iron fist he'd learned under Maniaques, earning the title Thunderbolt of the North. His Sicilian veterans formed his royal guard, their Byzantine-trained discipline making them unstoppable in Scandinavian warfare. But destiny has its own poetry. Harold died at Stamford Bridge in 1066, the last great Viking king falling to English axes. His death marked the end of the Viking Age, but it began exactly where his fortune had, with axes and blood and the dream of conquest. The gold he'd earned killing Muslims in Sicily paid for the army that died trying to conquer England. History circles close in blood. Consider what might have been. If Byzantine politics hadn't destroyed Maniaques, if Sicily had remained Byzantine, the entire medieval world shifts. No Norman Sicily means no Norman invasion of Byzantine lands. Muslim power in the central Mediterranean stays broken. The Crusades might never happen, or happen differently, without Sicily as a strategic base. The Renaissance might birth in Byzantine Syracuse rather than Italian Florence. But the campaign's true lesson transcends alternate history. The 1038 conquest proved Byzantine might at its apex: Greek fire, Varangian steel, tactical genius combining to create unstoppable force. Yet it also revealed the empire's fatal flaw: internal jealousy, defeating external victory. The pattern would repeat until Constantinople itself fell, Byzantine generals achieving impossible victories only to be destroyed by Byzantine politics. Modern parallels abound. How many organizations defeat themselves through internal conflict? How many victories turn to ash because subordinates can't bear their superiors' success? Maniakes conquered Sicily but couldn't conquer court intrigue. His tactical genius meant nothing against bureaucratic assassination. The empire that could coordinate Vikings, Greeks, and Lombards into perfect military harmony couldn't coordinate its own leadership. The closing callback writes itself. 500 Vikings had indeed terrified an emirate, broken Muslim power, and nearly changed Mediterranean history. They'd proven that disciplined ferocity could overcome any odds, that psychological warfare could topple centuries-old powers, that tactical innovation could achieve the impossible. But they couldn't terrify Byzantine bureaucrats, couldn't break palace jealousy, couldn't overcome the empire's greatest enemy itself. Sicily remained Muslim, then Norman, because Constantinople feared its own generals more than foreign enemies. The axes that had split Muslim skulls couldn't cut through Byzantine red tape.